Good morning, everyone, and welcome to IEA's fourth webinar of 2023. On behalf of the IEA, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the discussion today to discuss the lessons from the special audit reports, specifically the lessons from our most recent analysis of the special audit report on the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines. So my name is Jacqueline Kagume, and I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs in the Constitution, Law and Economy program. For those of you who might be new here, the IEA is a public policy think tank, and our mission is basically to shape decisions in public affairs through our research, analysis, and dialogues like what we're having today, and basically to try and generate insights to inform policy innovation. And the IEA works across 6 program areas or 6 policy areas, ranging from public finance management, the Constitution, Law and the Economy program, which is where I and my colleague work. And we also have further programs on regulation, futures and foresight, popular economics, and international trade and development. So the reason that we are here today, we have a presentation for you prepared by the CLE program. And as you saw in the notice, and as I've just mentioned, it's basically to discuss the special audits. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, a number of special audits related to expenditures on the utilization of funds related to COVID have been undertaken. I think most of you would be aware that the Office of the Auditor General, among the part of its mandate, other than the annual financial audits that it undertakes, occasionally it is required to carry out special audits related to specific expenditures that may be classified as high risk, or that are for specific special purpose utilization. And so it does this on a periodic basis, on a needs basis. So the COVID-19 was one such case. The emergency required utilization or allocation of specific funds to go towards addressing or redressing the risks related to that pandemic. And for that reason, the OAG was then required to undertake special audits to ensure that the utilization of those funds was in line with the law. So basically was lawful and was also effective. That's in line with Article 229 of the Constitution, that basically provides or outlines what the mandate of the Office of the Auditor General is. That check on lawfulness and effectiveness of public expenditures. So for the special audits that were related to COVID-19, so far there have been 4 that are in the public, that have been released and are available publicly. The IEA and specifically the CLE program, where I work with my colleague Leo, we've looked at all of them. Last year we had webinars to discuss the first 3. We had a special audit on utilization of funds by the national government, a special audit to look at utilization of funds by county governments, and the third one was on the utilization of funds by KEMSA. You are all very aware by now regarding the situation with KEMSA and the special audits and what the findings were. So we had the first webinars to discuss those 3, and now we are doing the last one for the most recently available special audit report, and that one is the one on the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines. We know that the pandemic is now almost, we hope that it's actually a thing of the past. But given that that audit is there, I think there's always something that we can learn from the findings. And we are also not sure whether tomorrow we might have another pandemic. So we thought to ourselves, following our analysis, it would be useful to discuss what are the emerging findings, what lessons we can learn in terms of rollout of vaccines now and in the future. And because we think there are useful lessons from that report in terms of the distribution, the rollout, the utilization at the national and county level. So for the different players, it would be useful to find out what can be done, what was done in this instance and what can be done in the future, basically to ensure that the rollout of vaccines is more efficient, and basically the entire administration of vaccines in the case of such an emergency is efficient. So that's the background as to this specific webinar. So we will have one presentation that will be largely made by my colleague Leo, who works with me in the CLE program. And then after that, we will open this discussion up to plenary to hear your questions. Please note down any questions that you might have as we go in the chat box that is here. But during plenary, we will allow you to ask your questions verbally. That said, I think I'll just talk about two things before I let Leo make the presentation. What you see on the slide now is what I've said regarding our analysis and the 3 reports that we've looked at. IEA has a facility, rather a web platform, where we've been sharing our analysis. And we thought it would be important for us to show this to you so that you can access the site, look at the reports that are the various analyses that are available there, interact with them, and if you have any questions, you can let us know. So for each specific analysis that we've done, they've been uploaded on the IEA publicaudit.ke website. I know most of you regularly interact with IEA's website. That's ieakenya.or, www.ieakenya.or.ke. But separately, we also have our specific website that is dedicated to our work on audits, and that's the publicaudit.ke website. So if from whatever device you have, you click on publicaudit.ke, it takes you to the platform that is there, that is highlighted on your screens, and it has basically several tabs. If you go to the last tab that talks about COVID-19 funds, so maybe I should also mention that in the past we've also been doing regular analysis of OAG reports at the national and county level. So we usually upload them on this site, and it's a dedicated platform because we have quite a bit of ongoing work across projects on audit analysis. So that's why. But for the COVID-19 funds, the last tab would take you to an dashboard, and this is the dashboard that you see now. And it also will give you information regarding all the past analysis we've done on the special audits, and including this particular one. So that site that you see, the dashboard that you see there currently shows you acquisition, distribution, and utilization of vaccines. It's a very interactive platform. So if you hover around it, you can get different pieces of data, different pieces of information regarding our analysis, on the utilization of those funds, on the resources that were allocated to this specific COVID-19 vaccines, on vaccine distribution, and basically different insights. So we highly encourage you after this session to go to that site, and to also go to, basically you can start from the public audit site, and then you can go to the dashboard, as well as you interact with the normal IEA website. So that said, you'll find the information that will be in this presentation on those two sites. And there's also a tab where you can ask IEA a question on the public audit website, and we encourage you to use it, and we'll be able to get back to you. So that's in terms of the resources that we have available for this analysis. I will now invite my colleague Leo to take us through the presentation. As you can see there, in terms of the outline, he will explain to us what resources were allocated for the vaccine, and specifically for the vaccine rollout, and then what the OAG says regarding the specific OAG findings on the utilization of the vaccines, the vaccine distribution map, and this is basically a geo map looking at the distribution at the national and the county level. So you will see that. And then the analysis of the use of those vaccines. Then what are the main findings? What can we learn from this distribution, this administration of vaccines for this case, and the management of this kind of emergencies now and going forward. So that's it for the background, and I'll welcome now Leo to go into the other part of the presentation. Leo.
Thank you, Jackie. And we're going to discuss the findings of the Auditor General on the rollout of vaccine. And the COVID-19 vaccines. So what we noticed in the audit report is that the Auditor General classified what were the resources that were used that were used to procure the vaccines. So we start from so largely there was an 8 billion shillings from World Bank, a grant also, another grant from KEPSA, 1.1 billion. Then there was 165 million from Gavi, and this was used at the onset at the beginning when the vaccines were ready. Then the loan facility from the World Bank of 13 billion, and as of March 31st, the Auditor General says only 2 billion had been paid for vaccines. So largely we want to now look, we start from the resource part, then we go to now what were the findings, and then we now look keenly now at the vaccine rollout. And then of course the usual issues. So for example, some of the things that the Auditor General noticed is that the grant from Gavi was not included as part of COVID-19 expenditures in the budget. Another thing is that there was unutilized resources from KEPSA of USD 2 million. And then, of course, there's the 36 million that was reported under MOH operations instead of COVID-19 training expenses. So, and then there were no supporting documents for training plans. At that time, there were a lot of trainings that were being done so that people would be able to deploy the vaccine. So that's the reason why you see most of the queries were around trainings. And then, of course, they were impressed what 3.3 million that were not provided for review, that were not surrendered. And then, of course, another one was training reports for 45 counties were not provided. For example, like whether those trainings took place or not. Then there was an overpayment of daily subsistence allowance of 4.25 million shillings. Yeah. So these are generally what the Auditor General observed as queries that related directly to the rollout. Now we want to discuss the vaccine rollout in terms of. So this was the schema for vaccine distribution. It started from, so once the vaccines were received at JKIA, it went to what they call the CVS, which is a vaccine, the vaccine store. And then what happens after CVS is that the vaccines are distributed again to 9 regional stores. So, and then at the regional stores, the vaccines were dispatched to sub-counties, so sub-county stores, and then from there now to the facilities. So you can see there is an elaborate logistical network from JKIA all the way to that facility, to the facility in place. Now, this is very important to understand because one of the things that the Auditor General was looking for is variances, and you will see the reason why this schema, why we need to understand this kind of scheme. And then now, if you look, this is the number of vaccines that were received at the national vaccine store and then distributed to the regional stores. So so you can see the doses that were received for each of the for the 5 vaccines. The first one is the Janssen AD26 COV2S is the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So received 7 million, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Sinopharm. So a total of 27 million doses were received out of which 23.5 million doses were dispatched. And then when the Auditor General did a physical count at the National Vaccine Store, they found that 3.2 million doses were still there. So now the variance between what was received, what has been dispatched, and what is in the physical count is 1.1 million doses. So that's at the national level. Then when it went to the regional stores, the doses that were received in the country that were received were 27 million at the vaccine. So the doses were received were 27.46 million doses of the five vaccines, which majority of it was AstraZeneca. And then, of course, what was dispatched was 22.1 million. And then when they did a physical count, they found 3.5 million doses of vaccines. And then what was unexplained was 1.76 million. Then to continue, now what will just present the data, and then what is how do we connect all these three, and what would be the estimate cost? Then at the county level, what was supposed to be received, what was received in the country was 27 million at the National Vaccine Store. And then out of that, 19.6 million was what was received in the counties. So counties received majority of the vaccine as expected, which is amounts to 70% of all doses. Then to connect all the same together is that the Auditor General, what the Auditor General did was to take the unexplained variance, find the estimate price per dose of each vaccine, and then now calculate the cost of what was missing. So between the doses that were received, between the doses that were sent to counties, and the physical count at the national level, and then now get an unexplained variance, and then after that multiply by the estimate price per dose, and then you find the cost of what is unexplained variance. Unexplained variance here, of course, our interpretation is these were vaccines that there was no data or written authority to support why those variances were not in the store and were not dispatched to the counties. So out of 27 million that were received, 19 million went to the counties. The physical count was 6.7 million. And then, of course, the unexplained variance here is 1.566, of which if you multiply each by the price, you get, for example, like the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, 266 million, equivalent of what to say, for example, lost or cannot be explained. Then as Oxford AstraZeneca, 316, and then Pfizer, 338 million. Of all of it comes to 920 million, 0.5 at national level of what was unexplained variance. Then the Auditor General at every county, they looked at the records of what was dispatched to the county, what was received at the county, what was dispatched to facilities, and also what is unexplained, what was damaged, what was what. So, for example, you can look, if you check here, the first column is on the type of vaccines, the different types of vaccines, and then the second column is on doses received. Third is doses administered, what was administered. Then the fourth one is what was in stock. Then what expired, what was damaged, what was wasted, and then in the last column is what was not explained. And as I had explained, what we call unexplained variances are vaccines that there is no written record that the Auditor General cannot confirm for whether they were lost, whether they were lost, pilfered, whether whether it was damaged. There's no record, or there's no way of explaining the same. So this is the how the doses were utilized. Now, if you look at now, if in an analytical format, that was just the raw data. In analytical format, you can see that what was administered at county level was 16.9 million doses, which as a share of all share of doses received at county is 86%, which is impressive to say the least. And but what was in stock is 3.8%, around 749,000. And then of course the what was damaged for 34,000. What expired is 400,000. What was wasted is 262,000, which is 1.3% of all of everything else. Then and the unexplained variance in total is 1.2 million doses, which is equivalent to 6.2%. Now to calculate the cost of unexplained variances at county level is that for you can see the Johnson and Johnson 198 but multiple. So the first column is on the type of vaccine. Then the second column is unexplained variances, which is the number of doses. And then the third column is the estimate price per dose in Kenya shillings. And then the fourth column is the total cost. And this total cost is a multiplication of what was unexplained multiplied by the cost of one multiplied by the cost of the cost of one dose. So you get out of 198,756, the cost of unexplained variances in counties was 149 million for the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. Then for Moderna, 169 million. For Pfizer, it's 440 million. And then the rest, the negligible for both Sinopharm and also for Sputnik. So in total, what is unexplained cost at county level is 774 million Kenya shillings. Now, so and then of course, what the Auditor General also did was to evaluate. The government of Kenya had a system where details of all those who received vaccines, the vaccines were administered to by dose, personal details, and then by dose, and then by dose, and those whether who received first, second, or the booster dose. So if you look at comparatively, the number of people who received first dose were 11 million, and majority of it was the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine. Then, of course, and this has to do with something about the nature of that the vaccine did not require the cold chain technology. And that's why you could see the use is more widespread than the rest than the others. And then given that this was also the one of the first vaccines that was used in Kenya. So the first dose, 67% of what was administered, of all doses administered, were first doses, and then caused 31%. Although these are not mutually exclusive, 11 million received the first dose, then 5.5 received the second dose, and then only 288 received the third dose. And this is just to remind all of us is that this is as at 31st March of 2022. So these were in the data in the changer system. And so if you notice, out of the 19 million that had been given out, another 2 million are not in the changer system. Vaccines are not in the changer system. So these are people who've already been vaccinated, but cannot be accounted for in this changer system. Now, looking at all those data, all that data, given the fact that the government of Kenya, the amount of resources that the government of Kenya had spent, the 920 million and the 774 million variances at national and county level respectively are significant. And partly this is a problem of that significance in variation at the national vaccine store, the regional vaccine store, and the county vaccine store implies that the way vaccines are the management of vaccines, there is first either an inadequacy in inventory management system, or secondly, the inability to hold people managing those systems responsible, to hold them accountable and explain why those variances have occurred in the first place. Then the second issue is that this is our own view is that looking at the data, that this is not something that is COVID related, only COVID-19 related. That this management, the kind of management of vaccines, the management of vaccines is a systemic problem, and it could also, even if the Auditor General would review the deployment of other vaccines, this would be a systemic problem. And then, of course, that those people, significant number of doses were not captured in the change system. That either it cannot be explained whether this was due to capacity, that there were no few, because in other places, what we understand of the process is that in other places, it was not entered directly into the computer. Some of it was done manually on paper. And then, so part of it is the vaccine handling process is something that needs to undergo a reform process. Whether it's a digitization, whether digitization of the same would solve it, or number two, the accountability process. If the disbursement, whether the number of direct, whether it can be the disbursement of vaccines can be done directly from the national store to the facility in the county, is something that should be also considered, because these other in the variances that relate from either the regional store or the counties. So that kind of network is something that also would have contributed how these vaccines were handled. So in conclusion, part of this is to bringing the accountability part into vaccine management is one of the things that the Auditor General report has shown that some of those losses were not significant, were significant, and some of those losses were not by chance. So thank you. Back to you, Jackie.
Thanks a lot, Leo, for the presentation. So Leo has taken us, shared the presentation with us. He's looked at basically the various resources allocated towards the vaccine rollout. We've discussed the vaccine distribution and some of the challenges that emerge, the variances in terms of the vaccine distribution, then there are a number of people who could not be accounted for or in terms of that system. So he's given us the picture based on that audit report. We had hoped to have a second presentation or a commentary from a medical practitioner in terms of their thoughts on what they feel might be the weak link when it comes to vaccine administration and distribution, not just COVID, but of course learning from COVID, but given our history. But unfortunately, the doctor that we had invited was not able to make it for this discussion. So we'll have a much briefer discussion and possibly end this by midday as opposed to 12:30. So thanks again, Leo, for that presentation. And I'd like to open this discussion for plenary in case anyone would like any clarification from Leo. If anyone has any questions, please raise your hand and let's hear it. Let me see if there's any question in the chat box, but None. So would anyone like any clarification from Leo, or are there any things that you thought yourself may have been a challenge that you'd like to hear IEA's feedback on the same? Yes, Martin, I see your hand is up. I also see Stephen. We can start with you, Martin. Please unmute yourself and ask the question. You can also turn on your video if you like.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
My question is, if what lesson after the findings, what lessons can we actually learn from these audit report going forward to inform policy making in future? Because we've seen the findings, we've seen the variances, we've seen the conclusions, but what lessons are we in line with our topic today? What can we get from here which is helpful and we can make as a policy recommendation? I think it's a general question for every other person. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin. Yeah, we take note of that question. So before we go to the next, to any other person who would like to ask a question, would you like to respond to that? Just a little more emphasis or clarity. Martin seeks clarity in terms of what we think could be policy proposals for policy change. What could be done better? Given the findings that we see from the OAG reports?
The solution would be to have there are two things. So there is the inventory part, and then the second part is the human element. So the human element is, the policy proposal for the inventory part is to digitize it now using barcodes. So for example, it will be like what you'd seen ordinarily in the supermarkets, that each dose would have a barcode, I think, which already had, and then those doses already had. Then what would be done is to have the at every facility that these drugs, that these vaccines are being dispatched to have those digital scanners, that if somebody leaves with the vaccines already, those would raise the alarm, and then the security would intervene. So you can now think about that is on the inventory side. But now you see the human element part is, somebody can walk into that facility, cut out those cartons of vaccines, but still nobody would be able to take an administrative action, that administrative action of stopping them, or people would connive, and then so that's a human element part, is where that human administrative action enforce accountability, like for example require like there are things automatic, people to step aside. So this human element part is where there is a big problem, not just handling of vaccines alone, but handling of drugs in entirety, because that is where the systems might be in place, because the inventory system, you can digitize it, you can have the barcode, and then have those scanners at the exits of the warehouses. But that human element part is where the people who are at administrative positions in the Ministry of Health need to shift incentives from the ability of those people to take out those drugs and have this kind of unexplained variances. So the policy, I know you've asked a very specific question, is what policy response should be required, which is, for me, the first thing is to have to digitize that inventory system, and not having just it in Excel, having barcodes, using barcodes, and then using those scanners at the exits of those warehouses. But secondly, it's to deal with that human element. And the only way you deal with that human element is to shift incentives. How do you shift incentives? you raise costs. And when you raise costs, part of it is raising costs is, for example, to require some actions like people leaving office automatically if such kind of variances occur and that kind. So it requires more of that dealing with that human element, because that's a problem.
Thank you. Thanks for that response. I hope that suffices for you, Martin. And in case anyone else also has a question or you'd like to make some addition, I don't know if there's anyone attending this who might be working either as a medic or somewhere related to the Ministry of Health or any health facility, maybe you can let me know. But yeah, because we'd be keen to hear your thoughts as well. But yeah, thanks for that response. I see a comment by Eric Musau that he thinks technology can be a challenge and one has to consider practicalities. In his case, the queue built up during vaccination and unable to connect. And I guess the system was unable to connect, so they opted for a manual recording, which meant some people did not get certificates for the vaccination. So I think this is just an emphasis on some of the challenges related to the technology, which of course are real, but I think there's obviously and definitely need to integrate both for any process to integrate both the manual as well as the digitized system, or to find an efficient way for both of these to work. I think in future, a useful addition that we could do is also to check comparatively which countries had the most efficient systems in terms of vaccine administration, in terms of rollout of this, so that we can propose more comprehensive policy recommendations for future, because as I said earlier, we are not sure that this would be the last. And from what we have had so far, there's obviously need to be better prepared. I think also something else that we also at the onset of the pandemic was that the countries that already had better systems, or the ones that seemed better prepared, of course, had a better response. So I think if we design more comprehensive policy recommendations that we can propose to the MOH and to all other relevant stakeholders, then it would help them to also be better prepared. But I'm also keen to hear from yourselves as well, in case anyone has any thoughts in terms of what would be a more efficient response, given the challenges that we saw from the audit and given your own experience. Because I don't see any hands, I guess that this was pretty clear and there are no further questions. So I think I'll just ask Leo, as you comment on, make your comments in response to Eric's comment, you can also make your closing remarks, and then we can wrap things up.
One thing to note is that, so Eric, it's true that technology is a challenge, but at the onset of the pandemic, getting the form locator, even the portal, the way the portal was being used, the entry into the portal was not something that was done at all across the country. So some other places you would see people behind a computer entering details directly into the system, but so it's something a challenge. The way we quickly adapt to making those technology solutions work is something that Kenya has to get better at, because as Jackie has said, the prevalence of zoonotic diseases, which COVID-19 is one of them, we'll see future pandemics more often. So, but I think that technology solutions are not everything, and that's why I agree with you. But I also think that technology solutions, what kind of problems would what kind of problems would we have with vaccine handling, and how we customize those technology solutions to meet that problem. So the reason why, for example, the one I mentioned is because I know major retailers use that kind of technology, across the country to they've deployed that technology across the country and they've used it more successfully. So I think it's something that once you've defined a problem and having that correct technology solution is something that we should consider. But we know that those technology systems that were used during COVID, like form locator, the changer system got better with time. But at the first instance, it was not. That improvement is as a result of feedback, people's response to that technology solution. At the IEA, we don't believe in what people would call technotrans, is that we throw any technology solution at any policy problem. But we think that the best way on how to guard those big warehouses with the number of drugs that they have or vaccines or is something that has to go beyond the human element and has to be precise. So in conclusion, I think we'll think more broadly about the policy solutions, and then would outline them in the brief, so that so that we can share with policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Leo. And thanks to all of you for being here for the duration of this discussion. The presentation will be available shortly after this, as well as the analysis, which will be shared on the two platforms that I showed earlier. So it's publicaudits.ke, but also if you visit IEA's website, among the tabs, you can still be redirected to the publicaudits.ke. So please make sure you visit our website and interact with this, as well as other publications that the IEA prepares.